I'm Phyllis, and my husband Mark is sitting right over here. He's been a very long time observer, and more recently also an imager, like mostly. But I'm still imaging. I mean, observing with eyepieces and telescope. So I'm thinking back to the time when I got my first telescope, and it came with 2 eyepieces, and I thought if it came with 2 eyepieces, I should use both of them. So one was a 25 millimeter Plössl, I think. And I think the other was maybe a 7 millimeter, which was way too much power, by the way. So if you have a fairly modern telescope, then you will know, hopefully you've read through some of the material, and you know that you see 1 1/4 inch eyepiece. And what that means is that the eyepiece itself is something like that. And if you measure it, it's about 1 1/4 inches in diameter here. We call this the barrel. So the usual telescope these days comes with a 1 1/4 inch diameter eyepiece. And this is really important because where you put the eyepiece on your telescope is going to accept certain sizes of barrels. So 1 1/4 is probably what you run into most frequently. You may also have a 2-inch eyepiece focuser. And if you don't, very often you can get an adapter which will turn your 1 1/4 inch into a 2-inch. This is my biggest eyepiece. This is 2 inches. So maybe I can do this. So you can see it's a 2-inch diameter barrel. This guy is huge, and we'll get to the weight issue in a few minutes, but this is where I'll go into weight. If you have an older telescope, or probably older is correct, you might also find that you have a less than 1 inch eyepiece barrel. This is a 0.965 inches. And these are generally older eyepieces. I had to dig this one out of a box. I knew I had it, but I never use it because I don't have any eyepiece holders that require 0.965 barrels. But you might.
You can get an adapter if you run.
Yeah, you could probably adapt from this size to the 1 1/4 size. I don't know that you can go to 2 inches.
Michael is demonstrating.
He is?
Yeah.
So here's someone's audio. I ask everybody to mute that isn't part of the discussion.
Okay, so that's this general barrel size thing. And it can be confusing, I think, when you begin and you see a 1 1/4 inch 7 millimeter eyepiece. Well, that is 2 dimension descriptions, and it was very confusing at first. But the 1 1/4 is the diameter of the barrel, and the 7 millimeter, or whatever millimeter, is the focal length of the eyepiece. It is printed on the barrel, usually somewhere. This one, yeah, there it is. So 7 millimeter is the focal length.
Right.
And the reason that matters is because it determines what magnification you're going to get through the telescope. So if you figure out your telescope's focal length, which is usually given in millimeters, and you divide it by the number of millimeters focal length of the eyepiece, then you know what your magnification is going to be.
Okay, so it's about 12,000.
So I think that I would strongly recommend that you figure out the focal length of your telescope and figure out what the magnification is for your different eyepieces. And that will help you to determine how much power you can use on a given night. I have a very fancy eyepiece box that I made many years ago. This is an old brandy box somebody got for Christmas. And if you can see, there's a card with print on it. And I figured out how much magnification each eyepiece would give me on the telescope that I use this eyepiece box with. And so I printed all that out, and I printed out the field of view. So the field of view is another number that's super important, but maybe not so much for a beginner. Field of view tells you how big the picture of the sky is going to be. So if the eyepiece I'm using at the moment gives me a 1 degree field of view, then I'm seeing 1 degree of sky. You can actually measure this with the stars and a clock. I have done it. I just use my card now because, well, it's easier. One thing you'll find out is that if your telescope has a motor in it to track the stars, then once you get your telescope aligned, then you can live with a smaller field of view because the telescope is tracking the sky. So you may not need a super wide field of view at that point. It's just a barrel. No. Does the magnification, I can't see it. Does the magnification, the barrel measurement? No. Where is she? There she is. And
because you were saying that you know the diameter, and you need to divide it by the length of the barrel.
It's not the diameter. It's the focal length of the eyepiece.
Oh, okay.
The actual barrel diameter doesn't have anything to do with magnification.
Okay.
So you want to divide the focal length of your telescope,
okay,
by the focal length of the eyepiece. And that gives you your magnification.
And the focal length is how long it is? That's not correct, is it?
How long what is?
The barrel. Like, in other words, what does focal length mean? Is that how long the barrel is?
The focal length is stamped on the eye.
Oh, okay.
The focal length generally is related to the barrel.
Right.
But the focal length is an optical measurement, not a physical package measurement.
Oh, okay. Okay. The way you were, that's what I thought. I thought it was, okay, but it comes with the eyepiece. I don't have to calculate that, right?
No.
Almost always.
Okay.
Martin has a question too.
Okay. Where to go? There it is.
He's asking if the field of view is calculated or is it measured in use?
You can go either way.
Yeah, either way.
You can go either way. If you measure it, there's a little procedure you can do. And when you see an advertisement for an eyepiece, it will usually tell you the barrel size, the focal length, which is that millimeter measurement, and it will tell you the field of view of the eyepiece, the apparent field of view. Now we're getting into the arithmetic, and I really don't want to get into the arithmetic too far.
Phyllis, maybe just, there's two things about field of view that confused me, and it's the apparent field and the true field. And what we're really interested in is the true field. What are you going to see on the sky? I just do a rough calculation of that. You have to know when you buy the eyepiece, it has a focal length stamped on it, like 7 millimeters or 25 millimeters. Or whatever, 10, and it'll produce a given power with that telescope. So you divide the magnification into that eyepiece's listed apparent field of view. It might be 68 degrees or 82 degrees. And if you're at 80 power and you have an 82 degree eyepiece, you're looking at roughly a 1 degree chunk of sky. This is completely confusing if it's the first time you've heard it, for sure. but that's all it is.
Don't most of the planetary programs do that? You can put in the F ratio of your telescope and the diameter of the objective, and it'll give you your apparent field of view.
Yeah, there's usually, it's automatically shown on. I'm sure your program does it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that it's really not much of a problem, and it doesn't need to be for our purposes. We're not, if we're doing visual, we're not imaging, so we just need a ballpark. Is it going to be big enough to catch the whole moon or part of the moon, or how big the planets will be? So there's some really sophisticated radians math that you can do, but I don't think we care about that tonight.
No, we're not going there today, or at least I'm not.
No.
So let's see, we talked about magnification, and we talked a little about the field of view. So that's
True, or
that's some number. So if you have a driven telescope, you're not so concerned about that field of view being so big. But I have a telescope that is not motorized. And so trying to locate some object in the eyepiece is harder. And so I like to start off with a pretty wide field of view to find whatever I want. And so in that case, the field of view becomes important. And the other thing is that since I don't have a driven mount, this is my clock drive right here. I have to push the telescope. And so if I have a wide field of view, it'll stay in my eye for some moments before I have to move the telescope. If I jack up the power and get a very small field of view, it's really hard. If you're doing public observing or something, and you have a very small field of view at the eyepiece, you're going to lose the object in between observers in line. So field of view becomes important if you have a totally manual telescope. Let's see, what else do I have? Probably going back to magnification. I'm assuming that people would be listening to this because they're thinking about what eyepiece should I buy. And when you calculate your magnification, I just don't see you going very high above 200 power around here, unless you've got a really large telescope. But the reason is that our seeing in North Carolina is not so good. The airflow comes over the mountains and it sinks down over the middle of the state. And then we have the ocean, and we end up with a very wiggly view. So if you magnify that wiggly view, it's going to be wiggly. Now, there are nights when the seeing, which is the wiggliness, the seeing is good. There's not so much wiggly. And that's when we use higher powers. So when you're thinking about shopping for eyepieces, keep in mind that those higher power eyepieces are going to be used far less than the lower powered ones. So in my particular case, with my 8-inch telescope, I usually use somewhere between 65 and 120. I'll go to like 180, but I just rarely go above that. So consider your magnifications and where we are. Now, if you're in Florida and you're down in the Keys, where the air is very, very steady because it's ocean air blowing over a little bit of island back over to ocean air, the seeing is incredibly good, and you can use much higher magnification. But typically in North Carolina, that's not so much the case. So at this point, you're probably thinking, yeah, well, exactly which eyepiece do I want? Because there are a lot of them. Well, some really practical things are happening right now, and that is that shipments of things from China and overseas are really slow. And so a lot of places are out of stock. You should really check and even call a vendor if you want a particular eyepiece, because so many things are out of stock right now. Apparently, the pandemic has caused people to find new hobbies that don't go out and about.
But this is how.
And the astronomy hobby has been flooded. So check your eyepiece vendor's stock. What else? Oh yeah. So you see this huge variety of prices. You'll see eyepieces under $100. You'll see eyepieces over $500. Why? Well, typically it has to do with the number of glass lenses within the eyepiece package. Like when I say the eyepiece package, I mean this. If there's only 2 polished lenses in there,